Imagine this. A man lies awake at 3 in the morning, decades after an intimate encounter that lasted no more than an hour. His life has moved forward, other relationships, other bodies, other moments of pleasure, yet this one memory returns to him with the clarity of yesterday. Not because it was more physically intense, not because the woman was more beautiful than others, he's known, but because something happened in that hour that he cannot name, cannot explain, cannot forget. It carved itself into a place deeper than memory, deeper than desire. It touched something in him that he didn't know existed until that moment revealed it. Now, imagine this same man trying to recreate that experience. He searches for it in new partners, in different circumstances, in varied encounters. He chases the ghost of that unforgettable night, but it eludes him. Every attempt feels hollow, mechanical, a pale shadow of what once was. And here's the disturbing question that keeps him awake. Was it really about her? Or was it about something inside himself that she somehow awakened something that has been sleeping ever since? In today's journey, we are going to explore what truly makes sex unforgettable for a man. Not in the way society reduces it, but in the way Carl Jung, one of the greatest explorers of the human soul, would encourage us to see it. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you will discover truths that will not only change the way you understand intimacy, but also the way you understand yourself. And the final revelation we will reach is by far the most powerful of all. Before we dive deeper, I invite you to take a moment to subscribe to this channel, to leave a like, to share this video with those who you feel will resonate with its message. Your engagement is what allows us to bring reflections like this into the world. And I assure you, what we are about to uncover may very well transform the way you view the essence of human connection forever. This is the paradox that haunts the masculine psyche. Men are told that sex is simple, that it's about physical release, about conquest, about the body. Yet every man who has lived deeply enough knows this is a lie. Because if sex were merely physical, why would one encounter remain branded in the soul, while hundreds of others dissolve into forgetting? Why would a single moment of intimacy possess the power to define a man's understanding of himself, of women, of what it means to truly connect with another human being? Carl Jung understood something that modern culture has desperately tried to bury. That unforgettable intimacy is never just about bodies meeting in darkness. It is about souls colliding. It is about the unconscious revealing itself. It is about a man confronting, in the most vulnerable moment possible, everything he has hidden from himself, his fears, his longings, his shadow, his anima, the feminine force that lives inside him whether he acknowledges it or not. But here's where it becomes deeply unsettling. Most men go through their entire lives never experiencing this depth of intimacy. They accumulate encounters like badges, yet remain fundamentally alone, fundamentally unseen, fundamentally disconnected from their own depths. They mistake intensity for meaning, novelty for transformation, pleasure for wholeness. And in doing so, they miss the very thing they're searching for, not out there in the endless pursuit of partners, but inside themselves, in the unexplored territories of their own psyche. What if unforgettable intimacy has nothing to do with technique, nothing to do with duration, nothing to do with variety? What if it has everything to do with a man's willingness to be psychologically naked, to let his carefully constructed mask dissolve, to meet another person not as an ego seeking validation, but as a soul seeking recognition? What if the most unforgettable sex a man can ever have is the sex that forces him to confront who he really is, beneath the performance, beneath the conditioning, beneath the desperate need to prove something? This is the question that should terrify and liberate in equal measure. Why are you afraid of intimacy that truly sees you? Not the you that performs, but the you that trembles, that doubts, that longs to be accepted in your entirety, shadow and all. Because until you understand this, every intimate encounter will be a repetition of the same surface-level experience, and the unforgettable will remain forever out of reach, a distant memory or a fantasy that never materializes. Jung believed that what we do not make conscious will continue to rule our lives from the shadows. And nowhere is this more evident than in a man's relationship to intimacy. The encounters he remembers are not random. They are maps to his unconscious, revelations of what he has been seeking all along but could never articulate. They are moments when the veil between conscious and unconscious became so thin that he glimpsed, however briefly, his own wholeness reflected in another person's eyes. So, before we go deeper, ask yourself, What makes an intimate moment truly unforgettable for you? And are you brave enough to discover that the answer has less to do with the other person and more to do with the parts of yourself you've been running from your entire life? The problem begins long before a man ever enters the bedroom. It begins in childhood, in the messages he absorbs about what it means to be masculine, what it means to desire, what it means to connect. Society hands him a script. Sex is conquest. Intimacy is weakness. Vulnerability is failure. He learns to separate his body from his soul, his desire from his depth. He learns that to be a man is to perform, to dominate, to remain in control at all costs. And in learning this, he severs himself from the very thing that could make intimacy unforgettable, his own psychological wholeness. Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to meet the world's expectations. For men, the sexual persona is particularly rigid, confident, experienced, tireless, dominant. But here's the devastating truth. The more a man identifies with this persona, the less capable he becomes of true intimacy. Because intimacy requires the opposite of performance. It requires presence. It requires the willingness to be seen not as a role, but as a complete human being with fears, longings, and depths he himself barely understands. This is why so many men find themselves trapped in a cycle of empty encounters. They bring the persona into the bedroom, and the persona cannot connect. It can only perform. It can seduce. It can satisfy physically. But it cannot touch the soul of another person because it is not soul, it is mask. And what Jung discovered is that the mask, no matter how convincing, eventually becomes a prison. The man who lives entirely through his persona becomes a stranger to himself, endlessly seeking validation for a false self, while his true self remains buried, unseen, starving for recognition. But there's something even deeper at work here. Something Jung called the anima, the feminine aspect that exists within every man's psyche. The anima is not merely an image. She is a psychological reality, a bridge between the conscious mind and the vast unconscious. She carries everything the masculine ego has rejected: receptivity, intuition, emotional depth, the capacity for genuine connection. When a man has not integrated his anima, when he has pushed her into the shadows of his psyche, he becomes fundamentally incomplete. And this incompleteness manifests most painfully in his intimate life. Think about what happens when a man encounters a woman who somehow resonates with his anima. Suddenly, intimacy becomes charged with a power he cannot explain. It's no longer just physical, it becomes numinous, archetypal, overwhelming. He experiences something far beyond pleasure. He experiences recognition. The woman before him becomes a living symbol of everything he has denied in himself. In her presence, he touches his own depths. This is why the encounter becomes unforgettable. She has awakened the anima within him, and through her, he has briefly glimpsed his own wholeness. But here's where the tragedy often unfolds. Because he doesn't understand what's happening psychologically, he mistakes the projection for reality. He believes the woman herself is the source of this feeling, rather than recognizing that she is reflecting something within him that he needs to integrate. He falls into what Jung called anima possession, a state where he loses himself in the projection, becoming obsessed, idealistic, eventually disappointed when the real woman cannot live up to the archetypal image he has placed upon her. Nietzsche understood a related truth when he wrote that in Revenge and in Love, woman is more barbarous than man. What he meant is that the forces of the unconscious, symbolized by the feminine, are more powerful than the rational ego. When a man has not done the psychological work of integrating his anima, his intimate relationships become battlegrounds between his conscious desires and his unconscious projections. He seeks wholeness outside himself, in the bodies and souls of women, never realizing that the wholeness he seeks can only be found through the difficult inner work of self-knowledge. This is the hidden problem. Men are conditioned to seek meaning in intimacy, while simultaneously being denied the psychological tools to create it. They are taught to perform rather than to feel, to conquer rather than to connect, to maintain control rather than to surrender to vulnerability. And so they move through their sexual lives like sleepwalkers, never fully present, never fully seen, accumulating experiences that leave no mark because they never allowed themselves to be marked. They protect themselves so thoroughly from psychological exposure that they also protect themselves from transformation. Viktor Frankl recognized that the primary human drive is not pleasure, but meaning. Applied to intimacy, This insight is revolutionary. A man can experience physical pleasure countless times and remain fundamentally unchanged, fundamentally empty. But one moment of meaningful intimacy where he is truly seen, truly accepted, truly met at the level of soul can transform his entire understanding of himself and what it means to be human. The unforgettable encounters are always the meaningful ones, the ones that carried psychological and spiritual weight, not just physical intensity. So the root of the problem is this: men are searching for unforgettable intimacy, while simultaneously defending against the very vulnerability that makes it possible. They want to be seen without being exposed, to connect without surrendering control, to experience depth without confronting their own psychological shadows. And this contradiction keeps them trapped in a shallow existence, forever chasing an experience that requires the one thing they're most afraid to offer their authentic, undefended, psychologically naked selves. The consequences of this psychological disconnection are more devastating than most men realize. They don't announce themselves dramatically. Instead, they work silently, invisibly, like a slow erosion of the soul. A man can accumulate dozens, even hundreds of intimate encounters, and never once ask himself why none of them left him fundamentally changed. He mistakes the absence of pain for the presence of satisfaction. He convinces himself that variety is the antidote to emptiness, that the next encounter will finally deliver what all the previous ones failed to provide. But what he doesn't see is that the problem isn't external, it's internal. He has become psychologically incapable of the very depth he craves. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the unconscious ruling our lives. When a man has not integrated his shadow, those aspects of himself he finds unacceptable, shameful, or weak, he cannot bring his whole self into intimacy. He brings only the parts he deems acceptable, the parts that fit the masculine script. And a fragmented man can only create fragmented experiences. He might achieve physical satisfaction, but he will never achieve soul satisfaction because he has left half of himself outside the bedroom door, locked in the dungeons of his own psyche. Consider the cognitive pattern that develops. A man enters intimacy with performance anxiety because he has identified his worth with his sexual competence. His attention is split between the experience itself and his mental commentary about the experience. He is simultaneously present and absent, engaged and detached. He cannot surrender fully because surrender means losing control, and losing control means confronting the fear that he might not be enough. So he performs, he controls, he maintains the mask, and in doing so, he guarantees that the encounter will be forgettable. Nothing memorable happens in the realm of performance. Memory is created in moments of genuine presence, and genuine presence is impossible when you're simultaneously performing and judging your performance. Neurologically, this creates a pattern that becomes increasingly difficult to break. The brain learns what to expect in intimate situations: guardedness, performance pressure, emotional disconnection. These neural pathways become so deeply ingrained that even when a man consciously wants to be more vulnerable, more present, his nervous system won't allow it. He has trained himself, over years or decades, to approach intimacy as a performance rather than as a revelation. And this training operates below the level of conscious awareness, which is why simply deciding to be more present rarely works. But there's an even darker consequence: the gradual numbing of desire itself. When intimacy becomes repetitive and meaningless, when it fails to touch the depths, a man begins to require more intense stimulation just to feel anything at all. This is not about physical desensitization, it's about psychological desensitization. The soul grows bored with experiences that don't feed it, and so he begins chasing novelty, intensity, extremes, anything to break through the numbness. But no amount of external intensity can substitute for internal depth. He is trying to solve a psychological problem with physical solutions, and it cannot work. This is where cultural conditioning reveals its most insidious effect. Modern culture has reduced intimacy to mechanics, to technique, to physical performance. It has stripped away the psychological, the spiritual, the archetypal dimensions that actually create meaning. A man is taught that unforgettable sex comes from mastering certain skills, from finding the right positions, from lasting the right amount of time. But all of this is surface-level manipulation that completely misses the point. Unforgettable intimacy has nothing to do with what you do and everything to do with who you are willing to be in that moment. Jung observed that modern man has become disconnected from the symbolic dimension of existence. Everything has been literalized, reduced to material cause and effect. But intimacy is fundamentally symbolic. It is the union of opposites, the dissolution of boundaries, the meeting of conscious and unconscious. When a man approaches it literally, as merely a physical act, he misses the entire psychological and spiritual significance. He participates in the symbol without understanding what it symbolizes. And so the experience remains shallow, forgettable, ultimately unsatisfying no matter how many times it's repeated. The truly tragic consequence is this. A man can spend his entire life seeking unforgettable intimacy while simultaneously ensuring he will never find it. His defenses against vulnerability are also defenses against depth. His fear of being truly seen is also a fear of truly seeing himself. And so he remains trapped in a hall of mirrors, endlessly encountering reflections of his own fragmentation, never realizing that the wholeness he seeks requires exactly what he's most afraid to do: confront his shadow, integrate his anima, and bring his complete, undefended self into the presence of another human being. This is the urgency. Every day spent in this pattern is a day of psychological stagnation. The longer the pattern continues, the more deeply it becomes embedded in the neural architecture, and the harder it becomes to break. The man who spends decades performing rather than being present doesn't just miss out on unforgettable intimacy, he misses out on the self-knowledge that such intimacy would have revealed. He remains a stranger to his own depths, forever seeking outside himself what can only be found within. The way out begins with a radical realization. Everything you've been taught about intimacy is designed to keep you on the surface. The performance, the conquest, the control, these are not paths to unforgettable connection. They are defenses against it. True rebellion starts when you recognize that the most revolutionary act a man can perform in intimacy is to stop performing altogether. It starts when you dare to bring your whole self, shadow included, mask removed, defenses lowered into the presence of another human being, and allow yourself to be witnessed in your entirety. Jung called this process individuation, and it requires something most men find terrifying: the deliberate confrontation with everything you've repressed. Your fears of inadequacy, your desperate need for validation, your terror of rejection, your longing to be accepted not for what you achieve, but for who you are beneath the achievements. These are not weaknesses to be hidden. They are the very material of transformation. When you bring them into consciousness, when you acknowledge them instead of defending against them, you reclaim the psychological energy that has been locked in maintaining the persona. You become whole. And wholeness is magnetic in ways that performance never can be. Consider what happens when a man makes this shift. Instead of entering intimacy asking, "How can I prove myself?" he asks, "What can this reveal about me?" Instead of treating the encounter as a test of his masculine adequacy, he treats it as an opportunity for psychological exploration. He becomes curious rather than defensive. He becomes present rather than performative. And paradoxically, the moment he stops trying to create an unforgettable experience, he becomes capable of it. Because unforgettable intimacy emerges not from effort, but from authenticity. This requires a complete inversion of the cultural script. Society tells men to be strong, invulnerable, always in control. But Jung understood that true strength lies in the integration of opposites. The man who can be both strong and vulnerable, both assertive and receptive, both masculine and in touch with his anima. This is the man who possesses psychological wholeness, and it is wholeness, not performance, that creates depth and intimacy. When you bring your integrated self into connection with another, you are offering something infinitely more valuable than sexual skill. You are offering genuine presence, and genuine presence is what the soul recognizes and remembers. Look at the great examples throughout history, not the seducers and conquerors, but those who understood intimacy as sacred encounter. The mystics knew this. The poets knew this. Rumi wrote that lovers don't finally meet somewhere. They're in each other all along. What he meant is that true intimacy is not about two separate beings coming together. It's about recognizing the unity that already exists beneath the illusion of separation. When a man understands this, when he stops approaching intimacy as conquest and starts approaching it as recognition, everything changes. The practical application of this insight is both simple and profound. Begin by doing the inner work that society told you was unnecessary. Examine your shadow. Ask yourself what you're most afraid of: being seen as weak, inadequate, needy, imperfect. Then ask yourself why those qualities feel so threatening. Usually, it's because you've identified your worth with an idealized image that excludes anything remotely human. But intimacy that touches the soul requires humanity, not idealization. It requires you to be real, which means being imperfect, sometimes uncertain, occasionally vulnerable. Start by bringing consciousness to your patterns. Notice when you slip into performance mode during intimacy. Notice when you're more concerned with how you're being perceived than with what you're actually experiencing. Notice when you're mentally absent, running commentary in your head, instead of being fully present in your body and emotions. These moments of awareness are the beginning of transformation. You cannot change what you do not see, and most men have never truly seen their own patterns because they've been too busy defending against them. Then practice what Jung called active imagination, the deliberate engagement with your unconscious content. This might mean examining your fantasies not as mere sexual preferences, but as symbolic messages from your psyche. What does your anima look like? What qualities does she embody that you've denied in yourself? What is your unconscious trying to tell you through the images and desires that arise spontaneously? This is not about judgment or suppression, it's about understanding. The unconscious speaks in symbols, and those symbols are maps to your own wholeness. But perhaps the most radical practice is this: enter intimacy with the explicit intention of being changed by it. Not of changing the other person, not of proving anything, but of allowing the encounter to reveal something new about yourself. This requires profound courage because it means surrendering the illusion of control. It means acknowledging that you don't have all the answers, that you're still discovering who you are, that you're willing to be affected by another person's presence. Most men defend against this because it feels like weakness. But it's actually the threshold to depth. The counterintuitive truth is that the moment you stop trying to be unforgettable, you become capable of creating unforgettable experiences. Because what makes intimacy memorable is not your performance, but your presence. Not your technique, but your authenticity. Not your control, but your willingness to surrender to the moment fully. When you bring your whole self, including the parts you consider shameful or weak, you offer the other person permission to do the same. And in that mutual vulnerability, something sacred emerges. This is the rebellion, refusing to participate in surface-level encounters, refusing to fragment yourself to meet an idealized image, refusing to perform when your soul is crying out for genuine connection. It means being willing to have fewer encounters but deeper ones. It means prioritizing meaning over novelty, transformation over validation. It means recognizing that unforgettable intimacy is not something you achieve, it's something you allow by removing the barriers you've constructed against it. Now, we arrive at the deepest truth, the revelation that redefines everything. Unforgettable intimacy is not ultimately about the union with another person. It is about the union with yourself. Every encounter that has ever touched you deeply, every moment that remains etched in your soul decades later, was not memorable because of what happened externally, but because of what it awakened internally. The woman before you became a mirror, through which you glimpsed the forgotten, denied, and hidden parts of your own psyche. She was the catalyst, but you were always the destination. Jung spent his entire life trying to communicate this single insight. The purpose of human existence is individuation, the journey towards psychological wholeness. And intimacy, when approached consciously, is one of the most powerful vehicles for this journey. Because in the moment of true connection, when defenses fall away and souls meet, a man encounters not just another person, but the projected image of his own anima, that feminine aspect of his psyche that holds the key to his unconscious depths. The unforgettable encounter is unforgettable because it brought him face to face with himself in ways that ordinary consciousness never allows. Think about what this means. When you remember that one night, that one woman, that one moment of connection that changed everything, what you're actually remembering is the moment you became more whole. She reflected back to you qualities you had disowned, receptivity when you'd only known aggression, softness when you'd only permitted hardness, emotional depth when you'd only inhabited the surface. Through her, you touched parts of yourself that had been exiled to the unconscious. And that reunion, that reintegration of the fragmented self, is what created the sense of meaning, completeness, and unforgettable significance. But here lies both the beauty and the danger of this process. If you don't understand what's happening psychologically, you risk spending your entire life chasing that feeling in external encounters, never realizing that the source of it lies within you. You become addicted to the projection, forever seeking women who can awaken your anima, not understanding that the real work is to integrate her yourself. This is why Jung warned that projection is both a blessing and a curse. It shows you what you need to integrate, but it can also trap you in an endless external search for an internal solution. The ultimate truth is this: the most unforgettable intimacy you will ever experience is the intimacy with your own depths. When you stop projecting your anima onto external women and instead begin the conscious work of integrating her into your own psyche, something extraordinary happens. You become whole. And when you approach intimacy from a place of wholeness rather than fragmentation, the experience transforms completely. You are no longer seeking completion in another person because you have found it within yourself. You are no longer performing to prove your worth because you have recognized your inherent value. You are no longer defending against vulnerability because you have embraced your shadow. This is what Jung meant by the conjunctio, the sacred marriage not primarily between two people, but between the conscious and unconscious within a single psyche, masculine and feminine, shadow and light, known and unknown. When these opposites unite within you, when you achieve psychological integration, then and only then can you participate in true intimacy with another. Because you are no longer bringing your fragmentation into the encounter, hoping the other person will make you whole. You are bringing your wholeness, and wholeness meeting wholeness creates something entirely different, not desperate merging, but conscious union. Not loss of self in the other, but discovery of self through the other. Consider the implications of this realization. It means that every intimate encounter you've ever had was actually about you, not in a narcissistic sense, but in the deepest psychological sense. The women who moved you were moving you toward yourself. The encounters that transformed you were revealing parts of your own psyche that needed integration. The moments you can never forget are the moments when the barrier between conscious and unconscious became thin enough for you to glimpse your own totality. This is why some experiences remain vivid, while others fade. The unforgettable ones were initiations into self-knowledge, while the forgettable ones were merely physical exchanges that touched nothing deeper than sensation. And this leads to the most liberating insight of all. You don't need to search externally for unforgettable intimacy. You need to turn inward and do the work of becoming whole. You need to confront your shadow, those aspects of yourself you find unacceptable. You need to integrate your anima, that feminine wisdom, intuition, and emotional depth you've been taught to reject. You need to move beyond the persona, that mask of masculine performance, and discover who you actually are beneath the conditioning. When you do this inner work, when you commit to the process of individuation, something miraculous happens. Every intimate encounter becomes potentially unforgettable because you are finally present for it. You are no longer fragmented, no longer performing, no longer seeking validation. You are whole, and you bring that wholeness into connection with another. This is why Jung insisted that the individuation process is both the most difficult and most necessary work a human being can undertake. It requires you to face everything you've been running from: your fears, your shame, your repressed desires, your denied weaknesses. It requires you to dismantle the carefully constructed identity you've built and discover the authentic self beneath it. It is terrifying, disorienting, often painful, but it is also the only path to genuine freedom, to authentic connection, to unforgettable intimacy that arises not from projection, but from presence. The final paradox is this: the moment you stop needing intimacy to complete you, you become capable of intimacy that truly transforms you. When you approach another person not as a missing piece, but as a whole being, meeting another whole being, the encounter transcends everything you thought intimacy could be. It is no longer about filling a void, or proving yourself, or losing yourself in another. It becomes about mutual recognition, about two souls seeing and celebrating each other's wholeness, about the sacred play of masculine and feminine energies meeting in conscious awareness rather than unconscious projection. So the answer to what makes sex truly unforgettable for a man is not a technique, not a partner, not an external circumstance. It is the degree to which that encounter brings him into contact with his own psychological depths. It is the extent to which the experience serves as a mirror for his unconscious, revealing what needs to be integrated. It is the moment when intimacy stops being about performance or conquest and becomes about revelation and transformation. It is when a man realizes that Every partner he has ever been with was actually showing him a reflection of himself. And the real journey was never about finding the perfect woman, but about becoming the integrated man. This is Jung's ultimate gift to us, the understanding that the external search is always pointing toward an internal reality. The woman who awakens your soul is awakening parts of your own psyche. The encounter that you can never forget is the one that revealed you to yourself. And the intimacy you've been seeking in countless beds and countless bodies has always been available in one place, in the courageous confrontation with your own depths, in the patient integration of your shadow and anima, in the difficult but transformative work of becoming whole. So, I leave you with this. The most unforgettable intimacy is waiting for you, but not where you think. It waits in the unexplored territories of your own psyche, in the rejected parts of yourself, in the feminine wisdom you've denied, in the shadow you've feared to face. Do the inner work. Pursue wholeness with the same passion you've pursued external encounters. And when you finally integrate what has been fragmented, when you finally meet yourself fully, you will discover that unforgettable intimacy was never about finding the right person. It was always about becoming the whole person. That is the revelation. That is the transformation. That is what Jung knew, and what every man who has touched true depth eventually discovers. You are what you've been searching for all along.